Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. You guys have sent us some fascinating stuff about Pablo Escobar.
Oh, yeah.
And let me tell you, this one is going to be a wild ride.
It really is.
We're talking about a guy who went from the streets of Colombia in the 1940s to running a billion-dollar cocaine empire.
A billion-dollar cocaine empire.
It's crazy. So we're going to trace his journey every step of the way.
Okay.
And by the end of this deep dive, you'll see how he built this empire and what impact he had on Colombia and the U.S. So to kick things off, we're going to talk about the historical context.
Yeah.
We're talking about Colombia during La Violencia.
Right. A decade of civil war that really shaped Escobar.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine the violence, the poverty.
Exactly. And the resentment it created.
So it's no surprise someone like Escobar emerged from this, right?
Not at all. I mean, his early life is a perfect example.
Okay. So tell me about it.
Well, he was born in 1949 in Rio Negro.
Okay.
A small town. His family was really poor. They moved around a lot looking for work.
Oh, so he grew up with this constant struggle.
Yeah. Deprivation, lack of opportunities. You know, it really shaped him.
So this hardship, did it push him towards crime or?
I mean, that's definitely part of it. But he was also described as intelligent, charismatic.
Oh, so there was more to it.
Yeah, even as a kid, he had this knack for spotting opportunities, even if they weren't exactly legal ones.
Ah, so the seeds were already there. So how did he start? What were his first businesses, so to speak?
Well, it all started with smuggled cigarettes when he was just 13 years old.
13. Wow, he was a natural.
Seems that way. Then he moved on to selling fake lottery tickets.
Smart.
Yeah, preying on people's hopes and dreams.
That's kind of dark.
Yeah, and then, believe it or not, he got into grave robbing.
Grave robbing? Seriously?
Yeah, he would steal tombstones, erase the names, and resell them.
That's crazy. I mean, what does that tell us about him?
I think it shows his audacity, his willingness to push boundaries.
Yeah, and by his late teens, he was stealing cars too, right?
That's right. He was already moving into organized crime.
So it's not just survival anymore. He's ambitious.
Very ambitious. It was about wealth and power at that point.
So how does he go from car theft to becoming the cocaine kingpin?
Well, you have to consider what was happening in the U.S. At the time, President Nixon declared the war on drugs in 1971.
Right, the crackdown on drugs.
Exactly. And that unintentionally created this huge market opportunity for someone like Escobar.
So the U.S. trying to stop drugs actually helped him.
In a way, yeah. The demand for drugs skyrocketed, and Escobar saw the potential.
Okay, so what was his first move?
He started smuggling marijuana through Panama, using the connections he already had.
So he's thinking big internationally.
Yeah, he's not just some local crook anymore.
But marijuana is not what he's known for. It's cocaine.
You got it. Cocaine was the real game changer.
Okay, but why cocaine? What made it so special?
Well, it was more potent, more addictive, and way more profitable.
I see. So how does this whole cocaine operation work? I mean, where does he even get it from?
So the coca leaves, the raw material, mostly came from Peru and Bolivia. Okay.
And they'd process these leaves into coca paste using all sorts of chemicals, kerosene, benzene.
Sounds dangerous.
It is. And then they further refine it into cocaine hydrochloride, the white powder everyone knows.
Right, the final product.
Exactly.
So it's a pretty complex process, lots of steps.
Oh, absolutely. And it requires labs, chemists, smugglers.
This isn't just some street corner deal.
Not at all. It's more like an illicit corporation.
And Escobar was the CEO.
Exactly. He understood that to control this, he needed organization.
So he goes legit, starts a company.
Haha, not quite. But he did create a cartel.
A cartel?
Yeah, in 1976, he formed the Medellín cartel.
Okay, so what is that exactly?
It's like a conglomerate of individuals and companies all working together to control the cocaine trade.
So they control everything from production to smuggling.
Exactly. From start to finish, they maximized profits and eliminated competition.
Wow, that's impressive in a messed up way.
It is, but with an operation this big, you know the law is going to come knocking eventually.
Right, so what happens? Well, that same year, 1976, Escobar gets arrested.
He gets caught.
Yeah, with 18 kilograms of raw cocaine.
18 kilograms, that's huge.
It is. It shows he was already a major player.
So what happens next? Does he go to jail?
Well, he tries his usual tactic, bribery. He tries to pay off the officers, even the judge.
Did it work?
Not at first, the officers refused. But the judge, well, he eventually caved.
So Escobar walks free, just like that.
Yeah, but this whole experience, it really affected him.
In what way?
It showed him that money wasn't always enough. He needed more. He needed power, control.
I see. And how did he get that?
Well, his response was chilling. He had the officers who arrested him killed.
What? He had them killed.
Yeah, it was a message to anyone who might cross him. Defy me, and you die.
Oh.
It was the birth of plata o plomo.
Silver or lead. Take a bribe or face the bullet.
Exactly. It became his motto, the cornerstone of his empire.
Brutal. So he's consolidating his power, eliminating threats. But what about the U.S.? They must have been pretty upset about this whole cocaine situation.
They were, and it's about to get even more intense.
How so?
Well, by the late 70s, the U.S. is feeling the full force of the cocaine flood, and they know where it's coming from.
The Medellín cartel.
Exactly. They realize they need to take a more aggressive approach.
What do? Send in the troops?
Not quite. They go the legal route. In 1979, they strike an extradition treaty with Colombia.
Extradition.
Yeah, meaning they can now bring Colombian drug lords to the U.S. for trial.
Oh, that's a big deal.
It was a huge threat to Escobar and the cartel.
Imagine you've got this lavish lifestyle, Hacienda Napoles, the zoo, the whole 9 yards.
Right, living like a king.
But knowing the U.S. is after you, ready to extradite you.
It's gotta be stressful.
That's like a gilded cage. So how does Escobar react to this? What's his next move?
Well, Escobar always had a knack for unconventional solutions.
What does he do?
He sets his sights on infiltrating the very system trying to bring him down.
What does that even mean?
He wants to get into politics.
He wants to become a politician, the cocaine kingpin.
You heard that right. It's a move that shocks everyone. He wants to become a politician. Can you believe that? It's a power move, pure and simple.
Yeah, I mean, talk about audacity, right? This is a guy who built his empire on drugs and violence, and now he wants to be a lawmaker.
Exactly. It's a complete contradiction.
So what was the reaction? Did people buy it?
It was a mixed bag. Yeah. Some were horrified, obviously, but others, especially the poor, they saw him as a potential savior. You know, the Robin Hood image.
Right. He did have that whole image of helping the poor.
Exactly. And he played that up big time during his campaign. He promised social justice, fighting corruption, peace for the country.
So classic populist tactics.
Oh, yeah. He knew how to appeal to people's frustrations.
Yeah.
He even poured money into social programs, built houses for the poor, funded soccer fields, you name it.
But let's be real. It was all about protecting himself, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
His main goal was to avoid extradition and gain even more power. But he was clever. He knew that having the people on his side would give him leverage.
Yeah, a human shield, basically.
Pretty much. But, you know, not everyone fell for it. There were plenty who saw him for what he was, a dangerous criminal.
So how did he deal with the opposition? I mean, was it all speeches and promises?
Let's just say his campaign wasn't exactly clean. There were allegations of voter intimidation, bribery, even violence.
So not exactly a fair election.
Not even close. Think suitcases full of cash, threats, attacks on polling stations, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds more like a mob movie than a political campaign.
It really does. But somehow, despite all of that, he actually won.
He won. He actually became a congressman.
In 1982, Pablo Escobar, the cocaine kingpin, officially became a Colombian lawmaker. It shocked everyone.
Wow, he actually pulled it off. So now he's got this legal immunity, a platform, a voice in the government. Did he enjoy it?
Oh, he definitely reveled in it. He saw it as validation, proof that he had made it. But his main goal was still self-preservation. That immunity meant he couldn't be extradited.
But by stepping into politics, didn't he also put a bigger target on his back?
You're absolutely right. And this is where things start to unravel. A new justice minister, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, emerges as a feral critic of Escobar and the corruption he represents.
So this Lara Bonilla, he's a real threat to Escobar's plans.
Absolutely. He's not afraid to call Escobar out, demanding his arrest and extradition.
And Escobar, how does he handle this?
Well, he tries to bribe him, of course. But Lara Bonilla refuses. He's not going to be silenced.
So what happens?
Escobar does what he does best. In 1984, Lara Bonilla is assassinated, gunned down by Escobar's hitmen.
Wow. So much for playing by the rules.
It was a turning point for Escobar. This wasn't just business anymore, it was personal. He had crossed a line.
And I'm guessing this didn't go over well with the government.
Oh, it was a declaration of war. The Colombian government, with pressure from the U.S., could no longer ignore what Escobar was doing.
So his plan backfires completely. Instead of safety, he gets a full-blown manhunt.
Exactly. He's forced to go into hiding, leaving his lavish estate behind. He becomes a fugitive.
But even on the run, he's still running his empire, right?
Oh, absolutely. From the shadows, he continues to control the drug trade, waging a bloody war against his enemies.
It's crazy how much power he still had. It's like something out of a movie.
It really is. This period became known as the War of the Cartels. Imagine bombings, assassinations, violence on a scale you can barely imagine.
It's hard to believe this was all happening in our lifetime. So how does this insane chapter end?
Well, that's a story for part 3. But trust me, it's just as intense as everything that came before.
Last time, we left off with Escobar on the run, at war with the Colombian government. I mean, it's insane to think that one man could have that much power, even when he's a fugitive.
Well, you gotta remember the network he built, right? Years of loyalty, fear, and let's not forget, a ton of money. He had sicarios, assassins at his beck and call, and informants everywhere keeping him ahead of the game.
So he's still in control, even from hiding, still calling the shots. What was he even trying to achieve at that point? Was he hoping to get back to his old life or just survive?
I think his priorities were starting to change a bit. You know, the dream of being a legit politician, that was over. And the constant pressure, the violence, it was taking its toll.
So was he looking for a way out?
Maybe there were signs he was open to a deal, but he wasn't going down without a fight, that's for sure.
So what was his play?
Bombings, assassinations, kidnappings. He wanted to cripple the government, force them to negotiate.
That's a pretty desperate strategy. Did it work?
Well, in 1991, President Gaviria, he saw how badly the country was suffering and offered Escobar a deal.
A deal? What kind of deal?
Surrender, confess to some crimes, and serve a reduced sentence in a Colombian prison.
So not a free pass, but better than extradition to the U.S., I guess.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Escobar got to design and build his own prison.
Wait, what? His own prison?
Yeah, they called it La Catedral. More like a luxury resort than a prison, really. It had a soccer field, a jacuzzi, even a waterfall.
That's crazy. He basically built himself a palace behind bars.
It was a pretty controversial move.
Right.
A lot of people saw it as a sign that Escobar was still in control, that the government was weak.
But surely he couldn't just run his empire from this luxury prison, right?
Well, that's the thing. Escobar being Escobar, he couldn't help himself. He continued to run his business from La Catedral, ordering hits, meeting with associates, even torturing rivals.
Sounds like he wasn't exactly a model prisoner. What did the government do?
They realized they had messed up big time. They tried to transfer him to a real prison.
And I bet Escobar wasn't too happy about that.
You know it. In 1992, he escapes from La Catedral.
He escapes.
How? Turns out he had built secret tunnels and escape routes into the prison. He always had a backup plan.
So the most wanted man in Colombia is on the loose again. The stakes just got even higher.
Absolutely. The manhunt was back on, and this time, the U.S. was even more involved. They sent in special forces to help the Colombian authorities.
This is turning into an all-out war.
Yeah, both sides were using everything they had, technology, intel, you name it. But Escobar, who was once seemingly untouchable, was starting to slip up.
What do you mean?
He was losing support, his inner circle was shrinking, he was becoming isolated.
The walls were closing in?
Exactly. And finally, in December of 1993, they cornered him.
They found him?
Yeah, in a middle-class neighborhood in Medellín, a shootout followed.
And that was it for Pablo Escobar?
That's right. He was shot and killed. The reign of terror was finally over.
Wow. What a story. From petty thief to cocaine kingpin to fugitive to, well, the end. It's a wild ride, to say the least.
It really is. It's a story that just grabs you, you know? It makes you think about ambition, greed, power.
It definitely shows the dark side of human nature.
No doubt about it. And it also raises a lot of questions, you know, like how did someone like Escobar gain so much power? What are the long-term effects of what he did?
Important questions. This deep dive into Pablo Escobar's world has been intense, fascinating, and honestly, a little scary. Yeah. But it's a story that needed to be told.
I agree. And it's a story that's still relevant today, with all the issues around drug trafficking and corruption.
Absolutely.
It really is fascinating how he was able to craft this image. And, you know, we have some source material, a transcript of a video about his life. And, you know, it's not just what's said, but how it's presented that gives us clues, I think, to his lasting impact.
Okay, so let's jump right in. This video starts off by talking about a turning point in Escobar's story, the 1981 kidnapping of Martha Ochoa.
Yeah.
Now, that name might not mean much to you, but she was the sister of key Escobar allies in the cocaine trade.
Yeah, and, you know, this kidnapping by the M19 guerrilla group, this wasn't just personal, it was a direct attack on Escobar's power, and his response was swift and brutal. He created definite kidnappers, or Los Extraditables, which was basically a vigilante group. They terrorized suspected M19 members, and ultimately they forced Martha's release.
Hold on, Los Extraditables. Was that just a fancy name for his hit squad?
Essentially, yeah, but the name is important because it implied that they were fighting against extradition to the U.S., you know, painting themselves as patriots, and they killed over 100 people, sending a message that, you know, messing with Escobar was suicide.
Wow, so he's building this reputation as a man of action, somebody who gets things done when the government can't, even if it's through horrific violence.
Exactly, and it's here that you start to see, I think, the seeds of that Robin Hood image. You know, he was seen by some as a protector, even a savior.
But he wasn't just relying on fear, right? He had this whole other side, almost like he was building a brand.
Precisely, and this is where it gets really interesting, because Escobar was incredibly savvy when it came to shaping his public image. Take his Melon Without Slums campaign. He poured money into housing projects, building homes for the poor. He even dabbled in politics. He became a member of parliament in 1982.
Wait, so he's going from drug lord to environmentalist and politics. It's like a PR makeover?
Yeah, he was trying to legitimize himself, you know, presenting this different face to the world. And to some extent, it worked. People saw him as somebody who cared about his community.
But this shiny facade couldn't last forever, could it?
No, it all started to crumble thanks to Justice Minister Rodrigo Bonilla. And he was the first major political figure to publicly denounce Escobar, calling him out as the criminal he was.
Right.
And Bonilla pushed for Escobar's removal from parliament, essentially, you know, exposing him as a fraud.
And I bet that didn't go over well with Escobar.
You're right. Escobar, true to form, resorted to violence. Bonilla was assassinated in 1984. And this was a major turning point. The Colombian government, under pressure from the U.S., finally declared war on Escobar's cartel and activated the extradition treaty.
Okay, so now things are escalating quickly, and this is where the video throws out some mind-blowing numbers about Escobar's wealth.
Yeah.
He's estimated to be worth $30 billion.
Right.
Which puts him among the richest people on the planet.
His cartel controlled a staggering 80% of the global cocaine market. At one point, the video mentions that his daily income was around $70 million in the 1980s.
Wow. To put that in perspective, they had so much cash that they actually factored in the 10% that rats would eat annually?
Right.
Wait, they budgeted for rats eating millions of dollars? That's insane.
It gives you a sense of the absurd scale of his wealth and power, but that wealth came at a terrible cost.
Right.
It fueled his ruthlessness and led to a terrifying escalation of violence in Colombia.
That makes sense. Up until now, it's been this strange mix of brutality and charity.
Right.
But the video then shifts to a much darker chapter, right?
Yes. The assassination of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galan in 1989 was a game changer. Galan was openly against Escobar and wanted to extradite him to the U.S. His murder sent shockwaves through Colombia, and it wasn't just Galan. Shortly after, Escobar orchestrated the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing all 107 people on board.
Wow, so he goes from building houses and schools to bombing a civilian airliner. Talk about a shift in strategy.
It was a turning point in his legacy. The Robin Hood image was shattered. He became a figure of terror.
It's crazy how somebody can be so contradictory. But even with all this heat on him, Escobar still managed to swing this insane deal with the Colombian government like Adderall. I mean, calling it a prison feels like an insult to actual prisons.
Yeah, it was essentially a luxurious fortress built to Escobar's specifications. The video describes it having a jacuzzi, a soccer field, even guest rooms. Can you imagine that you're in prison, but it's basically a resort?
It's almost comical, but also incredibly disturbing.
Yeah.
That the government was that desperate to appease him.
It highlights just how much power Escobar wielded. He was essentially untouchable.
But it couldn't last, right? He couldn't just live it up in his custom-made prison forever.
You're right. News eventually got out that Escobar was using Lacadral to continue his criminal activities. He was torturing and killing people right inside public outrage, forced the government to take action.
And that's when he makes a run for it.
Yes. In July 1992, Escobar escapes Lacadral. This kicks off an intense manhunt. You've got the Colombian army, the national police, a U.S.-trained search block, and then you've got this vigilante group called Los Pepes, all after Escobar.
Wait, back up a second. Los Pepes, who were they?
Los Pepes stands for Persecuted by Pablo Escobar. They were a vigilante group, and get this, they were funded by Escobar's former allies and rivals who had turned against him.
So it's not enough that the authorities are after him, but now he's got his own former friends and enemies coming for him.
That's right. It was a chaotic time, and it's all detailed in this video transcript. You really get a sense of the world closing in on Escobar. He was losing money influence, and most importantly, the protection he once had over his family.
It's like everything he built is collapsing around him.
Exactly. And this brings us to December 2nd, 1993, the day Pablo Escobar was killed in a shootout in Medellín.
The infamous rooftop showdown. Wasn't there a whole controversy surrounding how he died?
Yes. The third bullet Escobar was shot 3 times, twice in the body and once in the head behind the ear. The debate is whether that fatal headshot came from the Colombian police, or if Escobar took his own life, fulfilling his famous, quote, "I prefer to be in a grave in Colombia than in a jail cell in the United States."
It's like a final act of defiance, even in death. He wanted to control the narrative.
Perhaps. But regardless of who fired that shot, it marked the end of Pablo Escobar, the drug lord. But as this video makes clear, his story doesn't end there.
Right, because now we have to talk about his legacy, which, as we've already seen, is super complicated.
What's amazing is that even today, many people in Medellin view Escobar as a hero. They visit his grave, wear shirts with his face on them. There's even a whole narco-tourism industry built around him.
Seriously, after all the bombings, the killings, the terror he inflicted, how is that possible?
It goes back to that Robin Hood image we talked about earlier. Remember those housing projects? He funded the schools and hospitals he built for many in Medellin, especially those who benefited directly from his charity. Escobar was seen as a provider, someone who stepped in where the government failed.
Okay, but wasn't that just a way to manipulate people and secure his power?
Of course, there was a calculated element to it. He was building loyalty and creating a base of support within these communities. But for some people, that didn't matter. They saw him as a benefactor, even a savior.
I guess it shows how powerful the need for hope can be. When you're living in poverty, struggling to survive, and someone comes along offering solutions, it's easy to overlook their flaws, even if those flaws are monstrous.
That's a really insightful point, and it makes it even more crucial to understand the full picture of Escobar's legacy, because while he was building houses and schools, he was also destroying lives and warping Colombia's economy.
Speaking of the economy, the video gets into how Escobar's drug money actually had some pretty devastating long-term effects. It wasn't just about the violence.
Right, the influx of drug money led to rampant inflation. Think about it, you've suddenly got billions of dollars flooding the economy, but it's not tied to any real production or value.
Right.
This drives up prices for everyone.
So even if you weren't directly involved in the drug trade, you were still feeling the impact.
Exactly, and then you have the issue of money laundering. Escobar's gangs used real estate to clean their dirty money, buying up properties and driving up housing prices. So while he was building homes for some, he was making housing unaffordable for others.
It's such a twisted irony. He was simultaneously helping and hurting the same communities.
That's the paradox of his legacy. And it gets even more complex when you consider the impact on legitimate businesses. The constant violence, the instability created by Escobar's cartel made Colombia a risky place for investors.
So it wasn't just the drug money itself, but the whole atmosphere of fear and corruption that damaged the economy.
Precisely. And those effects are still felt in Colombia today.
You know, it's easy to get caught up in the dramatic aspects of Escobar's life, the violence, the wealth, the larger-than-life persona. But it's important to remember that real people were affected by his actions. Real lives were destroyed, and a whole nation was left grappling with consequences.
Absolutely. Escobar's story is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that the actions of individuals, especially those with power, can have ripple effects that extend far beyond their immediate circle.
So I guess after this deep dive into the twisted world of Pablo Escobar, I'm left wondering what it all means. I mean, he's dead, but his legacy is very much alive. How do we even begin to make sense of that?
It's a tough question. On the one hand, you have the undeniable harm he caused, the thousands of lives lost, the families torn apart, the damage to Colombia's economy and institutions.
And yet you also have this enduring image of him as a folk hero, someone who stood up for the poor and challenged the establishment. It's like people are choosing to remember only the good, conveniently forgetting the mountains of cocaine and bloodshed it was built on.
That's the danger of the Robin Hood myth. It romanticizes actions that are ultimately destructive. It's easy to be seduced by the narrative of the outlaw who fights for the underdog, but we can't ignore the real-world consequences of those actions.
It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. There are always shades of gray, especially when dealing with figures like Escobar, who were capable of both great cruelty and acts of apparent kindness.
What's fascinating to me is how this complexity plays out in the video transcript we've been analyzing. You can see how the creators are grappling with Escobar's legacy, trying to present a balanced view while acknowledging the enduring fascination with his story.
Yeah, one thing that really struck me was how the video highlights the lasting impact of Escobar's drug empire. Even though he died in 1993, the cocaine trade he helped build continues to thrive in Colombia.
That's a crucial point. Escobar's death didn't magically solve the problem. In fact, you could argue that his removal created a power vacuum that led to even more violence and instability.
It's like a hydra. You cut off one head and two more grow back. It makes you realize that Escobar wasn't just a lone wolf. He was a symptom of deeper systemic issues. Poverty, corruption, inequality that continue to plague Colombia today.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to move beyond simplistic narratives of good versus evil. When we talk about Escobar, his story forces us to confront uncomfortable truth about the drug trade, the allure of power, and the lasting impact of violence.
So to you, our listener, I hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on Pablo Escobar. He wasn't just a criminal mastermind or a folk hero. He was a complex figure whose actions had far-reaching consequences that are still felt today. His story is a reminder that history is not just something we read about in books. It's a living force that shapes our present and our future.
And it raises an important question for all of us. What other figures in history have we oversimplified? Who are the people we celebrate or condemn without truly understanding the nuances of their actions? I encourage you to think critically, to challenge your assumptions, and to keep digging deeper into the stories that shape our world.
Well said. On that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the complex legacy of Pablo Escobar. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.